pay attention. At some point in my life, I decided I was a master baker. No, not just a baker, an artisan of the dough, a kind of carbohydrate deity. It wasn't just about baking. It was a deeply personal quest for self-sufficiency and the illusion of having a unique skill in a world full of noise. And yes, I almost set the kitchen on fire because of one loaf of bread. I'm not talking about a little muffin that went wrong. I created a monster. And the lesson I learned is that humility tastes exactly like burnt flour mixed with existential regret. The story begins, like all bad stories, with a lot of confidence, too much free time, and zero experience. It was the peak of that pandemic phase, specifically in the second year, where the initial frantic energy had faded, replaced by a deep, unsettling boredom. Everyone was discovering a sophisticated new hobby: yoga, knitting, learning to play the ukulele. I decided mine would be sourdough bread, the famous, pretentious sourdough. After all, what could be more manly, more intellectually satisfying than taming the wild nature of microscopic yeast? It felt like I was battling a primordial force. I watched a 10-minute tutorial on YouTube, not the full 3-hour masterclass, obviously. The guy was too calm, wore a linen shirt that screamed privilege and balance. He talked about feeding the culture, about auto-lists, about controlled room temperature. These terms sounded less like cooking and more like an exclusive ancient ritual I was finally invited to. I wrote everything down meticulously, but my head is always traveling, spiraling out of control. In my mind, I wasn't just learning to bake. I was reinventing myself. I was already opening a boutique bakery, small, highly curated space where I would judge my customers' taste in bread. I even had the logo ready, a stylized wheat head with a permanently anxious expression. And the slogan, "From my neuroses to your table." The first challenge was the culture, the mother of the bread. My starter was named Zeus. I gave it a name, a personality, and a small, dedicated space on the counter. I treated Zeus better than I treated myself, monitoring its ambient temperature like it was a sick newborn. If the room temperature dropped half a degree below 72 degrees Fahrenheit, I turned on the oven just to heat the kitchen slightly. I conversed with Zeus. I whispered secrets to it. I'm that guy who speaks to his bubbling gray goo. I'd plead, grow, my son, ferment with purpose. Come a proud loaf. I was desperate for validation from a bacterial colony, but Zeus wasn't cooperating. Day after day, it looked like sad, slightly sour jelly. Dabala's bubbles, the hipster baker promised, were, at best, a timid burp after a weak beer. It had no power. I started overanalyzing everything. Was it the brand of flour? Was the water in our apartment too hard? Did Zeus sense my underlying, constant anxiety and shut down out of sympathy? Am I, perhaps, emotionally unavailable for a viable starter culture? I spent 3 full days reading Reddit forums, falling deep into the rabbit hole of yeast conspiracy theories. My head was completely traveling, convincing me I had accidentally poisoned my microscopic friend. Finally, driven by the sunk cost of $40 in organic flour, I decided it was time to move to the main event. The mixing, the recipe, in its cruel simplicity, said, mix flour, water, and starter until incorporated. I mixed, and I mixed, and I mixed for what felt like the entire length of the Middle Ages. 10 minutes later, I was looking at something that defied physics. It wasn't elastic dough. It was a shapeless, sticky, gray entity that looked and felt exactly like wet mortar that had decided to take revenge on its creator. The hipster baker, in his video, demonstrated the fold with the grace of a professional dancer. He said, do the folds every 30 minutes, gently, to build strength. Gently. Folding is an understatement. I was performing a low-budget, messy version of capoeira with the counter. Dough stuck everywhere. To my hands, to the counter, it even managed to get on the back of my neck. I realized I was fighting an uphill battle. The more I folded, the more it resisted. It was pulling back, taunting me. I got to a point where I gave up on using my hands, which were now permanently encased in a thick gray glove. I used a spatula, then a wooden spoon, and in the end, I resorted to leaning over the bowl and using my forehead to try and push the dough toward the center. It was a humiliating, sticky war of attrition. I was exhausted, covered in dough, and questioning all my life's choices. Why bread? Why not something simple, like a smoothie? After what felt like 3 full hours of intense manual labor, I shaped the dough. I shoved it into the Banneton basket, treating it with a false, desperate sense of triumph. I thought I won the battle. Now for the war. I covered it and let it ferment for hours. It tripled in size. I thought, this is I am the baker. I am the genius. I transferred the huge wobbly mass to the preheated Dutch oven. I put it in the actual oven. And I started watching through the little window, waiting for the miracle, expecting a golden, majestic orb to emerge. I was already composing my Instagram caption about the journey. What came out of there, friends, wasn't bread. It was a tragedy. It was a solid, dense, geological artifact. It was a hockey puck. It was a brick. It was an anti-bread. By outside appearance, it was pitch black, completely carbonized, hard as concrete, and the crust. The crust didn't gently crack. It exploded into a thick, black, impenetrable shell. It was inedible, inert, and frankly, menacing. I tried to remove it from the Dutch oven and had to use a chisel and a hammer. I swear I chipped the counter in the process. The bread pan now had a permanent loaf of bread permanently glued to its bottom. It became one with the metal. The aftermath was utterly humiliating. It wasn't enough to have created a non-lethal weapon. I had to deal with the evidence. The kitchen was covered in a fine layer of flour dust, but beneath that, the counters were sticky with the ancient remnants of my failed dough. It looked like it had snowed, but a highly adhesive, depressing snow. Zeus, my beloved culture, was dead from neglect in the jar, probably performing an act of self-destruction out of sheer shame. I smelled the air. It smelled like pure, unadulterated failure with distinct notes of spoiled yeast and burnt ego. I realized that my neurosis of being the guy who can master anything had finally been beaten by a simple mixture of water and flour. I was beaten by a microbe. I had to throw the bread brick away. I didn't just toss it. I had to pry it out of the pot. And even then, in the trash can, it resisted, sitting there like a tiny, dense judge, silently mocking me for my ambition. What did I truly learn? I learned that it's okay to be bad at things. It's okay to acknowledge your limits. Life is less about mastering every skill you randomly decide on, and more about laughing when you fail spectacularly. I wanted to be the master of the dough. I ended up being the king of disaster. And that's okay. Vulnerability is our most authentic seasoning, but also the most bitter to swallow. But the most important takeaway, today, I walked to the actual professional bakery. I bought a loaf, and it was glorious, fluffy, chewy, perfect. The bread cost $10, but the lesson I learned, that's priceless. Actually, it does have a price. It costs 3 pounds of organic flour, 3 days of my sanity, my pride, and the permanent scarring of my favorite Dutch oven. I wasn't born to cook. I was born to pay professionals for their labor. And that, finally, is my truth. tell me in the comments below that I'm not completely alone in this. Because if it's just me scrolling through life making these choices, then honestly, that's kind of depressing. But if you've done this too, then hit the like button. Because liking this video is basically saying, hey, I get it. You're not insane. Well, we're probably all a little insane, but at least it's together. And please, genuinely asking, here subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that misery loves company, and I've got plenty of misery to share. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so you get notified every time I upload, and come back to watch me figure out how to be a functional human being, one catastrophe at a time. I'll be here, probably scrolling through something. Definitely overthinking it.